Hi, everybody. Welcome to my childhood VHS collection, Volume 5. So, anyway, let's get started. Reviewing all my childhood collection of VHS tapes. Donkey Kong Country, The Legend of the Crystal Coconut. So, back in the day when I got this on tape, on VHS, I had no freaking idea that they actually had an entire 3D Donkey Kong show at the time. I mean, it never aired on television in the United States, as far as I remember. So when I saw this, like my mind was blown, and I freaking loved this movie. This was like maybe the first episode or something like that, but it's presented here as like a full movie. Maybe they combined like two or three episodes to make, a movie, which they used to do back then for TV shows. I thought this was great. I was also really annoyed when I found out later on the internet that tons of people just bashed the shit out of the Donkey Kong Country show like it was some awful remnant of the 90s. And I completely disagree. I always liked it. I always thought it was funny. I thought it was charming, and I really liked the animation. Now, I saw this when I was a young kid, and I rewatched The Legend of the Crystal Coconut like 10 billion times. Like, I was obsessed with this movie, and like as a kid, I thought it was great. Do I think it's great now? Somewhat. Like, it isn't bad at all, and I don't know why people hate it so much. It's charming in like that 90s way, just like how the Sonic and Mario cartoons were back in the 90s. But yeah, Legend of the Crystal Coconut is awesome, and I love the yellow tape. They made the tape yellow, just like how they made DK64, the yellow cartridge, banana yellow. It's good. It isn't bad. Alvin and the Chipmunks meet the Wolfman. I remember this came out, I think, in the early 2000s, and it was after they did when they had the Chipmunks meet Frankenstein. There was like two Halloween movies they made, and this is when the Chipmunks made like a small comeback in the early 2000s, where they were still drawing them in 2D, and they were still awesome. They were like still the Chipmunks before they trashed them when they turned them 3D in the late 2000s with those shitty movies. But this was like the final era of the good original version of the Chipmunks. I'm a huge Chipmunk fan. I remember Theodore becomes a werewolf in this movie. So one of the biggest questions to ask is that during this early 2000s window, they had these two movies where they meet the Wolfman and the other where they met Frankenstein during Halloween, right? They may have had a little bit of merchandise here and there, and I think they had commercials for these. The biggest question is, which movie was better? The one where they met the Wolfman, or the one where they met Frankenstein? Oh, look, it's the Chipettes. The good version of them. You know, the old school version of them. Well, this was very funny, classic. I would love to rewatch this. Theodore being turned into a werewolf was really memorable, and they were probably trying to figure out a way how to turn him back to normal. It's a very fun, spooky, Halloweeny movie to watch during, October. And it represents like the final window in time when the Chipmunks were still awesome. Anastasia. Really good movie. What really pisses me off is that there's tons of people that constantly think that this is a Disney movie. It's not. It has nothing to do with Disney. This is like a Universal movie. Oh, 20th Century Fox. They made the movie. Not Universal, not Disney. It has all the makings of a Disney movie, but just because it has the makings of it doesn't make it a Disney movie. It's a 20th Century Fox movie. Because back in the day, you had Warner Brothers with Space Jam and Cats Don't Dance, Thumbelina, stuff like that. Then you had Universal making their own animated films. Then you had 20th Century Fox making their own animated 2D films in the theaters. And all four of these companies were all competing against each other for like the box office of the biggest 2D animated feature movie phenomenon. And that's what made the 90s and the early 2000s such a magical time, is that this was the golden age of 2D animation. It was like everywhere you went. Like every other TV show, every other movie was a big 2D, strictly 2D animated feature film. It was like a true golden era. But anyway, the most memorable part of Anastasia was the villain, and I don't remember his name, but he had a cool looking lair, and he had a memorable song in the movie called "In the Dark of the Night," something like that. And the most memorable character, the best character in Anastasia is not Anastasia. It's not her boyfriend or whatever. It's frickin' Bartok, the white bat, who is like the sidekick to the villain in the film, which is basically like Iago from Aladdin, and he's like Jafar. He is so memorable, and he's a great looking character, and he was funny in Anastasia, and he really stuck out in the film. I mentioned this in my other VHS childhood reviews that the little characters they gave to the villains or the good guys in the old 90s animated feature films, the little characters, a lot of the times those little characters were a lot better than the human characters. Like in frickin' Pocahontas, I loved Flit and the raccoon and the rest of them. They were all charming and better and entertaining, more entertaining than the human characters were. And you always notice those little characters in these films that really stood out. And they would help sell merchandise, and they worked well with the humans. But true story is that Anastasia was like a hit movie at the time. So it was successful against the towering Disney. The movie was successful enough with the character Bartok that they actually gave Bartok his own spin-off movie. And I don't think I remember seeing it, but I remember the ads for it at the time, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. The little white bat from Anastasia gets his own film. Because it seemed like he was the little star of Anastasia, and it was cool to see him get his own feature film. So unfortunately, I don't have Bartok the Magnificent, the VHS tape. That's another thing I can add to my VHS childhood collection. But this is a figure of Bartok, the white bat from Anastasia, that's like from McDonald's or something. I chose not to open it, but maybe I should. Cool, right? The old Bartok toys were really cool. I loved this character when I was a kid, and I wish they did more with him, but they did give him his own film. So, awesome. Like, Bartok is one of the most underrated 90s characters. Now, a lot of people saw Bartok in Anastasia, and some people thought that he was a knockoff of Batty from like Thumbelina or something, who was voiced by Robin Williams, and they do look similar looking, you know. But anyway, who cares? You know, great cartoon animal characters were all the rage in the 90s. Sonic, Bartok, Batty, the list goes on and on. And it was such a golden time for animated animal characters too, not just, you know, the 2D animated human characters. Next we have the classic that really started it all with this revolution of the 2D animated feature movies, The Little Mermaid, because this came out in 1989, and it was like right on the cusp of the 1990s. So the late 80s was really the beginning of this golden age, and it ended in the early 2000s, right? With the movie Home on the Range by Disney, which I think was their final 2D animated film, like long before they decided to do one more, which was The Prince and the Frog or whatever. This is a rare tape because of the controversial cover in the Golden Castle, which we all know what that is, but we don't need to talk about it because let's just focus on good stuff, nostalgia, and not conspiracy stuff for this video. I've talked enough about that. But yes, I remember rewatching The Little Mermaid about 10 billion times when I was a child, and it was an excellent movie. Everyone who grew up back then has seen The Little Mermaid about 1 billion times. It's a classic. I loved Ursula and Sebastian. Here we have The Little Mermaid 2, Return to the Sea. I remember this being a great movie at the time, really interesting, and it was special because this was when they were starting to make, in the early 2000s, these sequels to the old 90s animated feature films. It took a long time for them to consider making a Little Mermaid 2. It has to do with Ariel's daughter, and I think the plot is the same from what I remember. But guys, it's been like frickin' 20 years since I've seen this, but I do remember it being great, though. And really, maybe they could have made a third Little Mermaid film, but I just love that it represents the time where, unlike today where they keep making remakes of their old animated feature films, this was back when they made sequels and actually did the right thing with the characters and the story and the lore of what they already created. A continued story of the original stuff, and it's 2D animated. It's not a freaking remake or none of that crap. But even though this is a really good movie, it is forgettable for some reason, and I don't know why. I guess it just maybe came out too late. It came out in the early 2000s, and the original Little Mermaid was from 1989, so maybe this should have came out in 95 or something. I do understand they were busy making other films, so I don't know. But for some reason, this gets forgotten. The Rescuers! I really liked The Rescuers when I was a kid. This is cool, it's got the gold around the Rescuers logo. The Rescuers Down Under, the sequel from the early 90s, was more memorable to me than the first movie. Although the first movie had this really creepy villain woman who lived in the swamp, that kind of reminds me of the mother from Waterboy with Adam Sandler. And it's a really good movie. The bird, the pilot of the movie, was really fun. He was like a funny character. Back then, they had these rat characters a lot in animated feature films. You had Fievel from American Tail. You had the Rescuers. Um, like there was lots of little rat characters and stuff, and it was cool. And by the way, what's weird is that this pigeon who flies in the film, and I don't remember his name because it's been a long time since I've seen the Rescuers. He kind of reminds me of that pilot that was in DuckTales and frickin' Darkwing Duck. He's similar because he's like the pilot and he's got the helmet on, and so he's like the early version of that character from the Duck era of the Disney cartoons on television, the Disney afternoon. I think the most memorable thing about the Rescuers, other than the pilot, was the villain and the swamp and the alligators. Yes, I remember the little girl in it because the original Rescuers, there was a little girl as kind of like the main human kid. In the sequel, Rescuers Down Under, it was a boy, so they changed it from a girl to a boy. Yep, and they both had blonde hair, I think. They were a good couple, and I don't remember their names, and I should, but they were one of the most memorable animated couples, I would say, in all of cartoons. And I don't even remember their name, but I do remember watching The Rescuers. And here we go. I just talked about it. The Rescuers Down Under. Down Under. This is the sequel to the original, and it takes place in the desert this time. And now, like I said, with the boy character, it was more epic in scale, and the animation was like the 90s, where the original Rescuers movie is old. It's like before the 90s. But, I explained in another video that the VHS tapes, even though films like Bambi, for instance, and Cinderella, they're from like the 50s or whatever, but they were re-released in the 1990s. So all of us 90s kids grew up watching them first in the 90s. So to us, they were 90s films. So they retroactively become part of our childhood and become part of the 90s. So in other words, Cinderella, Bambi, Little Mermaid, they became 90s characters even though they're from an earlier time than the 90s because they were part of the VHS childhood revolution or, whatever. I think The Rescuers Down Under is better than the first movie, and maybe I'm just saying that because it was more memorable to me than the first one. I remember the villain was a real creep in this movie. Yeah, there's other things I want to say about Rescuers Down Under, but we have to move on. Can't Stay Here Forever. The Parent Trap. Now, this is one of the best movies of the 90s. This girl was everywhere back then. She was all over the place, and this was one of her big movies. It was a charming movie. It was a cute movie. And even though the plot was kind of dumb and kind of predictable, it's the way you present the plot. Because when you think about movie plots, they've been done a million times, like practically all of them at this point, which is okay. That isn't a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It shows that we've had a lot of great stuff to enjoy. So when you see a plot that looks similar to something else you've seen, it's like you just have to enjoy how they present the plot, even if it's predictable. Not that this is like a super predictable movie, but anyway, the movie has good songs. The most memorable scene in the film is when she gives her twin the earring when they're at like summer camp. Oh my god, that was such a memorable scene. It was like terrifying that she would give her the earring. Like my god, it's so like scary. And she screamed and everything. Yeah, it was memorable, really memorable. Mouse Hunt. I want to rewatch this movie and maybe I'll give it a review. But this was an excellent movie. Nathan Lane was hilarious. It's like this movie that's kind of like Tom and Jerry, like the live action version of Tom and Jerry, where they live in this mansion and they're trying to kill this one little effing mouse who's destroying like their house. And the thing with the mouse traps and this other guy who's with Nathan Lane in the movie, Lee Evans. Excellent comedian. They're both excellent comedians. Now, this is a classic movie, and this was back when DreamWorks was on top, and not all of their movies were 2D were animated or 3D animated. Not all of them were. They became known for that with stuff like Shrek and Chicken Run, but this was during the early 2000s when they also made live action movies. Now, this movie you could watch, like, kids can watch it, teenagers can watch it, adults can watch it. It's one of those films that everyone can watch and enjoy and love. Mouse Hunt is like a classic, and it's really become forgotten over time. I don't know why, but great movie though. I remember watching it so much at the time, but after only like a year after it came out, everyone seemed to forget about it, including myself, and I don't know why. Why did we forget about Mouse Hunt? This is a great movie. It really is. It's one of Nathan Lane's greatest films, and Nathan Lane is a hilarious comedian. Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. Now, this was like the direct sequel to Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. One of the greatest Scooby-Doo movies, of course. I didn't think this follow-up was as good as Zombie Island. It seemed like a step down to me. Zombie Island had such a excellent idea with the zombies being real. And then I remember even as a kid when this came out, when I was like a teenager, I was like, that's what they came up with for a follow-up? Witch's Ghost? You know, just a ghost as the villain? Like, the plot is like kind of generic to me. I mean, it's Scooby-Doo, but still, that's what made Zombie Island so great, is that they had them encounter real supernatural force, and I guess ghosts are supernatural, sort of, even though they're real, but the most memorable part of Witch's Ghost was the Hex Girls. They were so hot, and they were such a great band in the film. The Hex Girls, they were really memorable. Very satanic as well. I remember back in the day, you could get a Scooby-Doo stuffed animal with this tape. It came with the tape. They had like a promotion and a commercial for it. The animation in Witch's Ghost is excellent. It follows the excellent animation from Zombie Island. Unfortunately, after Witch's Ghost, I think the next one was Cyber Chase, and I don't have that on tape yet, which was, you know, a decent movie, and the villain was cool, but once Cyber Chase came out, the animation took like a dip down. Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost had excellent animation, and they both should have been in the theater, that the animation was so good. When Zombie Island came out, it was like the rebirth of Scooby-Doo for the 90s, and it was excellent. Then Witch's Ghost came out, and it was like less good, but it was still cool. And they should have kept the way they looked during the 90s, and I mean, they did. Yeah, sure. They also aired this a lot, I remember, on Cartoon Network's Cartoon Theater. So yeah, Witch's Ghosts. Cool. Small Soldiers. It's surprising I've got to part 4 and I didn't talk about this film yet, because it was one of my favorite childhood movies. It was extremely creepy and had moments that were, like, unnerving to watch as a child. And it's basically like the badass teen version of Toy Story. It's where all the toys, the Gorgonites, team up against the bad guys, which is the army in the film. And it's amazing that there was no sequel to Small Soldiers. So the film was, like, violent and had some adult humor because Phil Hartman was in the film. And Phil Hartman was hilarious in this movie. And you can always count on Phil. And if I recall, Small Soldiers was Phil Hartman's final movie, which is so sad to see because he was one of the funniest comedians of all time. This was a memorable scene where the cat is with the leader of the Gorgonites. Sanctuary, sanctuary. Because this character right here in the green, he's kind of based off of Quasimodo. And in the film, he kind of reminds you of Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Disney movie. I actually remember having the Small Soldiers toys at the time. I still have this character, and I forget his name, but he was a jackass in the movie. He was one of the most memorable jackasses in all of film. Small Soldiers is an excellent movie, and it's one of the greatest of the 90s. I can't believe there's no sequel to it. What the hell is that all about? The Black Cauldron. First of all, look at the shine on this. This was like the trading cards in the 90s where they had the shine. And they made the tape shiny. So this came out during Disney's quote-unquote dark age, which was the 80s. No idea when I was a child. None whatsoever. No one ever said, shit about that. So you assumed it was made then and it was a 90s film. It was a great movie. Like, this little character, and I forget his name, he used to eat the apple in the movie. He had a funny voice and he was really memorable. The Black Cauldron. Yeah, it's generic, but wow, is it so great. Like, the animation. And it was dark, from its title and the way they presented the special effects in the film. It was like a creepy film, and it felt very adventurous and very ambitious. A lot of people always talk about whoever saw this movie, that they loved it, and I loved it. I used to watch The Black Cauldron all the time back then. I'm so glad I still have this. You can see, like, kind of the sun damage here on the cover, but it looks cool because it's shiny as well. So it's like you get to keep all that. Black Cauldron is one of Disney's greatest 2D animated films. The villain was also really creepy. Basically Satan, Which, of course, it's a Disney. They love Satan. Babe. Now, this is going to be foreign to a lot of you younger viewers, but this was actually a huge film in the 90s, was Babe. And they had like a sequel with Babe in the Big City. It was really cute. Like, it had all the animals talking to each other in the film. And it had like a cult following. People viewed it a lot like the 90s version of Charlotte's Web. I remember back in the day watching Babe with my grandma, who I was really close with back in the day. I loved my grandma. My grandma loved Babe, and she had all the stuffed animals for Babe that they used to have at McDonald's back then. She used to collect them all, and she would put them on top of her TV, and we would watch Babe together all the time. It was a really good movie. It was. And, like, it's better than Charlotte's Web, really, because it's funnier and, this was, again, I mentioned this in another video when I talked about Air Bud and other things. And Free Willy. This is back when they made good live-action movies with animals. Before they made trash live-action movies with animals in, like, the 2010s. With all those frickin' buddy movies. This is when they used to do a good job with it, and Babe was one of the best. So, again, not Disney. This is Universal. See what I'm saying? I talked about that before. It's a Universal movie. Good movie. It was a memorable 90s movie. The Citizen Kane of talking pig movies. Yeah, Babe was like a big thing for, like, kind of a small window in time, I guess, looking back. People loved Babe at the time. It's kind of funny thinking about it because people don't talk about Babe anymore. It's just one of those things in pop culture because I guess, like, what else is there to say about it? I don't know. Mulan. Well, this is one of the greatest 90s Disney animated films. Mulan is a great movie. Mushu is great. Her story, her plot is really great. The music is excellent in Mulan. I didn't see the live action remake, and I really don't want to, because I can tell it doesn't have the charm and the humor, especially the humor of the original Mulan, like these characters and Mushu, and even Mulan, like the grandma in Mulan was really funny and memorable. Where was all the humor that was lacking and like not in the live action remake? That's what I loved about the original Mulan is that it was cool and badass, right? Where you have the girl with the sword and everything, but at the same time, it still had humor. It was taken seriously, but not so seriously that it felt like I don't know, World of Warcraft or freaking House of the Dragon or something. It wasn't like that. Mushu was such a memorable character, and he was really funny also. Eddie Murphy was the voice of Mushu. And the Cricket, and I think his name was Cricket in the film, became friends with Mushu, and they would hop around together. And even though he was such a little character, he was just a charming little character, though. And it's amazing how he just survived the whole film. But it actually makes sense. Crickets survive. I've had lots of crickets in this frickin' basement that I live. I've been invaded by the crickets, so they live. So it makes sense that throughout all this danger of the film, the war that goes on, Cricket here lives on in the film. He never dies. I think there was Mulan too, but I don't have that on VHS, unfortunately. I live. Check it out. I got my old school Mushu toy. Dragon, dragon. I don't do the tongue thing. Yeah, so I got Bartok and Mushu. Pretty cool, huh? Yes, sir. Anyway, let's put him down. Talk about the next film. I could be wrong, but I may have talked about Lion King 2, Simba's Pride before. But just in case I didn't, I'll quickly talk about it here. I thought it was a great film, and I thought it was worthy of the Lion King name. I remember Scar's wife was the villain in the film, and she was great. She was memorable, charming villain. They had like a fight in the rain in the film. So Lion King 2 is more intense than the original Lion King. The plot is really well done. The animation is excellent. It's just great. I mean, the whole thing is like a great, film. And there's a lot more to say about it, but yes, The Lion King 2. This was like the final window in time where Lion King was still big. Although, you could say Lion King one and a half or whatever that's called. That was like the final window in time. But man, I remember eating so much McDonald's and watching all the Disney films back then. So this was another, you know, amazing childhood memory to have. Holes. This was a really big movie. I think it was 2003 or something like that. And it was based on the book. It was a best-selling book at the time in like the early 2000s. I actually think I read the book Holes for school. We all did. It takes place in like the desert, and they have to dig holes and all that kind of stuff. It was one of the best early 2000s live action films. It was also funny. The adults were really good actors in the film too. Um, he was like Even Stevens on the Disney Channel. Then he did other things later on. But this actor, I forget his name, he became a victim of the Illuminati as a child actor. Yes. Holes was a classic, and I think they should have made Holes too. Let's not forget about Holes. Really big movie at the time. Ice Age. I love Ice Age. Like the original one was the best one of all the Ice Age films. So, speaking as like a huge Ice Age fan, I have to say the first one is the best one, and I I think they made too many sequels. and they didn't take care of the characters or something when they made the sequels. Something happened. I don't know, different writers, something. Somebody leave a comment below. Like, what happened to Ice Age? Because I remember when the first one came out, it was such a huge hit. It was so much fun, and everything was done so well. But even from the second film, in my opinion, I already had problems with it. I remember Manny the Manatee in the film was voiced by Ray Romano. Sid was excellent, and I forget his name, the Sabretooth. And the three of them really felt like they did become a family. It was just really fun. Uh, Scatter, sorry, I don't know what the name of the little character is with the acorn. He was really funny, and he kind of reminded me of Wile E. Coyote in the film because he was obsessed with the acorn and all that. Ice Age is great. You know, it's one of the classics of the early 2000s. Like it rivals the greatness of the first Shrek movie because in the early 2000s, Ice Age and Shrek, I think, were like going head to head with one another. See, look, 20th Century Fox made this, not Disney, not Universal, 20th Century Fox. All the big companies were getting into it. And back then, when they made a children's movie, they wanted adults to like it too. Like it wasn't just for the kiddies, you know? So it wasn't shitty like the fucking Minions movies and all that crap. This is back when they actually made great animated films for everyone to enjoy, including adults. And it wasn't embarrassing. But anyway, moving on. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones. This was like a really excellent movie. And I think this VHS tape came out at the same time that they were airing this on Cartoon Network's Cartoon Theater in the early 2000s. Because I think this is I think it's an early 90s movie, but this is when they were remarketing the film. It was like they reintroduced the film. It was amazing to see the Jetsons meeting the Flintstones in like the same universe. How it explains that the Jetsons live above them or something. I think, and there's time travel involved. It was just mind blowing to see that because both of those shows were so big, and it was like a fantasy. I'm sure lots of fans had back in the day. Like, what if the Flintstones met the Jetsons and then they actually did it? It was like it's like a dream fantasy movie, and it's real. I think it's one of the best, you know, Hanna-Barbera. It's definitely the best Hanna-Barbera animated movie. 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure. Truth be known, it's been a very, 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 very long time since I've seen this film. So there's some parts of it I don't remember. But I do remember he becomes friends with them. And Patch was a character that I think became popular from the TV series they had based off of the original movie. Because the first Dalmatians film was in the 60s. Then they had a cartoon in like the early 2000s, the 90s. Then they had a sequel to 101 Dalmatians, right? And here it is right here. But it gets kind of confusing because they also had the live action Dalmatians films. So like again, like the Little Mermaid and stuff, they resurrected the Dalmatians in the early 2000s. They really had a big boom period. This may have been around the same time where they started coming out with all the Dalmatian toys at McDonald's and stuff. My memories of this film is that I really liked it, and I loved eating McDonald's and playing with the Dalmatian toys while watching it. Cruella de Vil returns as the big baddie of the film. Um, not that she's a baddie herself, because she's a bitch, but she was one of the most memorable bitches in all of film. But this is a really good movie, but this is one of those like films that you forget about, that you're like, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing this." But it was a thing, you know? But you got to understand, like back then in the golden age, there was so many sequels to the old animated films that another one was coming the next year, so you didn't have enough time to like savor them. It really was a golden age. Like they would just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. It's not like today where it's like you get a bunch of crap. So, yeah, we were spoiled with animation back then. The Prince. of Egypt. It was rare to see a religious film be released in animation where it was actually great, and The Prince of Egypt was huge at the time. I remember seeing it at the movies when I was a kid, in like this really old movie theater that looked like it was from the 70s that I was in for some reason. So it made the film even more mystical, like the way I watched it in the theater. It's a great film. Even though like Christians were really into it, it's really more for Jewish people, I would say. And it was made by DreamWorks, so this is again back when DreamWorks was excellent and they were head to head with Disney. The Prince of Egypt is one of the best animated films of the 90s. Had an excellent score, really good plot, really good animation, and it had its really disturbing things in it. There's lots of really disturbing things in these old animated films that adults can like too, where it's like it's serious, but it's also fun for kids. And that's what was great about the 90s that they don't do anymore. In the 90s and the early 2000s, they would make animated films for adults to enjoy also. It wasn't just for the little toddlers running around. And Prince of Egypt was one of those excellent films. And the Pharaoh, his brother, was really, memorable. Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas. Now, I remember this coming out in the early 2000s. Look at that shine. See, look how much they cared back then. Even, like, look at the shine. Like, they cared, It was like, they cared. So, truth be known, Mickey actually made a lot of Christmas movies. I think he made like 4 of them. And this was really excellent because the animation felt like it was a part of House of Mouse. This was in the early 2000s. It was one of Mickey's best movies. Some parts of it are forgettable, but it's one of Mickey Mouse's best movies, too. It's interesting to see Max in this film be a little kid still. So it's kind of like it takes place before a Goofy movie because Max is younger in the film. So really, this film would have to take place in between Goof Troop and a Goofy movie, even though it was released after a Goofy movie. Now, these were the kind of Christmas movies that they showed us in school when they brought in the TV and during Christmas time, and they were like, "Here, kids, watch the Christmas movie," and we're like, "Okay." That was one of those films. And Snowed In at the House of Mouse was another one. That's another Mickey Christmas movie. I may have talked about this in another video, but just in case I didn't, this is Pooh's Grand Adventure: The Search for Christopher Robin. It was my favorite Winnie the Pooh movie because in the film, Christopher Robin, the main boy of the Winnie the Pooh movies, right, who's like their best friend, he gets lost, and they're trying to find him, and it's such an excellent idea for a plot because it's not it. There's like a sense of danger involved in what the Pooh characters have to go through. It's not just like you know goo goo gaga, baby crap. No, it's like the Winnie the Pooh was an excellent series back then, and they were really funny. So the search for Christopher Robin was really special because it was the first time where they made a plot. They made the plot better in Winnie the Pooh. Because even though all of the Winnie the Pooh stuff back in the 90s was excellent, this is like the first time where they amped up the plot. And this was the beginning, in my opinion, of the better Winnie the Pooh movies. Like the first best one is this one. Because like the old Winnie the Pooh movies were excellent. The first one from the 70s was excellent, which we watched in the 90s. No idea it was from the 70s at all. No one ever said shit about that. Then the second one, I believe, was The Search for Christopher Robin. And then the third one was the Tigger movie, and I think the fourth one was the Piglet movie. Those 4 films were excellent, and everything else in between was like, it was good, but those 4 movies were like the golden Winnie the Pooh movies. My grandma, who I mentioned earlier, who loved Babe, was a huge fan of Winnie the Pooh. Now, everybody's grandma back in the 90s was a huge fan of Winnie the Pooh. Now, Winnie the Pooh had a golden age in the 90s. There was so much merchandise of Winnie the Pooh. I remember going in like toddlers' rooms back in the 90s, and the whole room would be Winnie the Pooh themed and everything. Yeah. So we're getting near the end here, but we still got classics going on. Jimmy Neutron, the original movie. Now I can talk about this movie for maybe 2 hours because I loved it. And there's a lot of people who are not young enough to know that this movie came out before the TV show. Okay? This was the original movie that started it all, of the character of Jimmy Neutron. It was an excellent movie where the aliens. Now, this is a Nickelodeon movie. The aliens kidnap all the adults on Earth and send them to outer space. And now the kids rule the Earth, which was like a dream fantasy, especially at the time, because there was lots of rebellious films against adults at the time, which was relatable. The animation is excellent. The characters are awesome. The music was awesome. I loved the Jimmy Neutron movie. It's one of the best movies of all time, like the original one. And King Goobot was an excellent villain. He was so funny, and the characters were really good. And also, the relationship between Cindy and Jimmy in the first movie, they had a moment where Jimmy was in jail, okay, and she was trying to rescue him, and she was talking to him. Now, they had this, like, they hate each other kind of relationship, but it grew in the film where it seemed like Cindy did have a crush on Jimmy, and it seemed like like a natural progression where they hated each other and they slowly like wanted to, be with one another like a couple. But then in the show, they made Cindy despise Jimmy even more. And it didn't make sense. It like conflicted with how they had their dynamic of their relationship from the first movie. They changed Cindy to being even more of a bitch in the show than in the first movie, and she was, nasty in the first movie. But still, it was weird that I remember in the Jimmy Neutron cartoon, they had an episode where they had Cindy and Jimmy in the lab or something, and they did some experiment. And after the experiment, then all of a sudden Cindy, like, loved Jimmy, and it's like in the original movie they didn't have to do that. They already actually naturally fell for one another. But anyway, it's also weird. Like Nickelodeon made these girl characters with pigtails that were always like nasty girls. You had Helga from Hey Arnold, who was nasty. She was a blonde girl with pigtails. Then you had Cindy, a blonde girl with pigtails who was nasty. Both made by Nickelodeon. Then you had frickin' Angelica from the Rugrats. Yellow, blonde hair, pigtails, and she was a nasty biatch. We all know that. And it was like, why do they keep doing that over and over again, Nickelodeon? It was weird. Excellent movie. The whole thing with the Yokians, they were like egg aliens. And I remember they had an animated episode of the cartoon where the King Goobot returned and invaded Earth. It was awesome. It was like a sequel to the original movie. I love the yellow, tape. Just like the yellow DK tape, the crystal coconut. I can't talk enough about how much I love the original Jimmy Neutron movie. Great times. Got a blast. Now to talk about a major classic where I kind of don't want to talk your ear off for an hour about this, but The Brave Little Toaster was amazing. I loved The Brave Little Toaster. Still do. It was excellent that they made characters out of inanimate objects, because when you were a kid, you would look at stuff like the vacuum or a blanket or a radio, especially the lamp. You would look at them as a kid and you would kind of play with them and you'd be like, well, you could make a character out of them. So the fact that they made them characters was really cool. I think the original Brave Little Toaster takes place in the 1950s. At least that's what it seems to imply, with the radio being like old-fashioned looking. The first film was really dark when they go to the dump in the film. The Brave Little Toaster is a 90s icon. And this came out before Toy Story as well. It's weird I have this on DVD and I wanted to get it on tape, but I couldn't find it, so I was like, well, I'll just get the DVD. Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars. This was the sequel to the original Brave Little Toaster. There was like four movies, I think, for the toaster. And this one I loved more than the original. I was such a huge fan of Going to Mars. And I mentioned this in another video that there were the old Windows 95 computer games I played, like Putt Putt, the purple car, and there was one where he went to the moon. Putt Putt goes to the moon, Putt Putt goes to the moon. And then, so in the 90s, Putt Putt went to the moon, and Brave Little Toaster went to Mars, which is funny, because they're both inanimate objects with big eyes that came alive. Because Putt Putt was a purple car that was alive. It was similar to the toaster, Brave Little Toaster. There was like this annoying baby in the film that they were trying to save. I think he was from the first movie, and there was something about the Brave Little Toaster movies that was excellent. Now, this came out a long time after the original film because I think, like Little Mermaid, the first Brave Little Toaster movies from the late 80s or the early 90s, and the sequel is from like the mid 90s or something. Goes to Mars, it was like from the late 90s. So it took a long time to make a sequel, but when they finally did, it was so worth it. Blanky or Blanket, I think his name was a really memorable character. The lamp, like all of them. He was like a new character, and the imagination in the Brave Little Toaster was amazing, really. Reminds me of Timmy the Tooth. Now, here's another film I can talk about for hours. All Dogs Go to Heaven is one of my favorite childhood movies. It also makes you wonder if all dogs actually do go to heaven, and I think that they do, but maybe not in the same way we think. But the characters are really excellent, and the first one's from the late 80s, the like 89 or something. Maybe the same year as Little Mermaid. I loved Charlie and the little girl, the villain, Carface, which is a parody of Scarface, his buddy. The animation in All Dogs Go to Heaven is so phenomenal. It's like mind-blowing how good the animation is. It's a contender for the best animated looking feature film ever. It's just amazing. Yeah, like I was right, 1989. And it's an MGM movie. And I should have this on VHS, but nope, got it on DVD, which is better, but I want the fat tape, right, guys? You like the old fat tapes? This was amazing. I mean, I loved it. Then we have All Dogs Go to Heaven 2. Now, I actually printed this cover on my printer here because the cover for this I didn't like, so I wanted the original poster. Now, much like they did with The Rescuers, okay, the character in the first film was a little girl. The character in the second film was a little boy. And the villain in this film was Red. He was like this character that was basically like the devil. And Charlie's soul was up for auction again, and he was allowed to come back to Earth because he died in the first film, and then they let him come back to Earth in the second or something. Um, the plots were excellent in All Dogs Go to Heaven. I actually loved the second one more. I remember the second one, the dogs were in cages, and they were all captured by Red, and they were going to go to hell and stuff like that. Back in the old days, there were lots of excellent heaven and hell movies. Then there was also an All Dogs Go to Heaven Christmas special, and then it really faded off after that. But the All Dogs movies, Go to Heaven movies, were some of the most excellent animated movie series of all time, up there with Aladdin. So definitely check out All Dogs Go to Heaven 1 and 2 if you want true classic 2D animation that will blow your mind and make you realize how amazing the 90s was. Then watch these two movies. 1996, so it was a long time again after the first movie. This is back when they never forgot about these series and they kept them alive. Yep, there we go. The fifth row. Because part one was these two, part 1 and 2, and then the third row. Then I did part 4, which is this row, and here's part 5, this row. Stay tuned for part 6 and 7, where I'll go over the rest of my childhood VHS tapes. Complete the saga, all this childhood memories of the 90s and the early 2000s. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And please leave me down some comments on these videos for my childhood VHS collection. Because let's not forget about these films, because just talking about them again, it just like reminds myself like how amazing these movies were and how they just don't make them like they used to. Thanks for watching. Have an excellent day.